our presentation today is on testing at scale, establishing rapid prototyping and experimentation processes at Southern New Hampshire University. We're really happy to be able to present this to you all virtually. We're going to start after reviewing some agenda items. We'll do some introductions, but I'll cover some context and background for testing at SNHU, particularly pertaining to our teams. We'll cover some lessons learned from that process, and as a matter of giving you some insight into how we've enabled the testing process, we'll do a short design walkthrough of just one use case that our teams have enabled over the past couple of years. Plenty of examples that we have, so we're just going to walk you through one short one. Before we get started, by way of introductions, my name is James Walker-Myers. I'm the Associate VP of Learning, Science, and Assessment at SNHU, serving our global campus or online learners. I'll kick that over to Sara.
Hi, my name is Sara Reidy. I'm a Director of Learning Solutions, specifically focused on exploring areas of our portfolio related to innovation and enhancements. And I'll kick it to Colin.
Hi, everybody. I'm Colin Porter. I'm the Director of Learning Engineering as part of our new Learning Solutions group. And my team really sits at the intersection between our technical systems and instructional design, developing prototypes that increase the amount that students are learning and the speed with which they do.
Excellent. All right, we'll start with some context and background. Our team, just to situate you into the larger SNHU ecosystem, we know SNHU is a large university. We're responsible for a slice of testing and innovation and the learning experiences in the SNHU portfolio. So by the numbers, you can see some of the facts and figures here of kind of the scale at which we're operating with SNHU. Most importantly for us, when we're talking about testing and managing the learning experience in the online space, we have over 1,200, I think over 1,300 course offerings in total. Our terms are running frequently, meaning that we have many terms and then many sections of single courses that are delivered by a group of faculty. So let me say that differently, a composition course that we've designed that may be supported by upwards 50, 75 faculty in a given term teaching from the same kind of course shell or course framework for that experience. What that means is we have a lot of data. We have a lot of data coming at us frequently, and we also have some level of risk in creating friction in the learning experience if we are not enabling improvements and thinking about the changes we want to make in that system thoughtfully and deliberately. Our team is really focused on testing and innovation in a time horizon of 6 months to a year. So we're really looking at the things that we think we can enable pretty quickly into kind of the global campus learning ecosystem when it comes to our online learners. That is much different from some of the other innovation activities that SNHU may be involved in, which are focusing on transformative models for education and thinking more holistically about what we might be doing in terms of the future of online learning. So that context, I think, is important in terms of how we have worked to enable a testing process that focuses on short-term solutions and really thinks about how we can deliver those in a scalable, sustainable, replicable way as we're thinking through how to support that for all of our online learners and many of these course offerings that we're managing centrally. With that, I'm going to kick that over to Colin on our lessons learned.
Thanks, James. So I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about sort of the past and the present of where New Learning Solutions, which is together sort of our capacity to design, test, and evaluate some of our interventions. Certainly not the only place where interventions happen in this large university, but it's something that we've worked on collaboratively for at least 4 years. So what I'm going to show you here is a graphic that my colleague Jay Leone, who's on my team, and I came up with 4 years ago, basically a design-based research framework. And it was really intended to solve the problem of how do we make data-informed decisions about interventions that are going to improve learning outcomes. As Jaymes was saying, we have a ton of data about what learners are doing, how they're being successful or not in various courses on particular assignments and all of that kind of thing. We also have a lot of courses and faculty to test with. It's really, if you want to do testing, it seems like the ideal setting in which you could do that. But really the idea was like, hey, if we have a new piece of technology or something really fascinating that we want to test, we'll have the ability to bring it in, say, what do we want to know? We can develop a proof of concept fairly quickly and a low risk. We can develop off of that proof of concept multiple prototypes, select the one that seems best suited for our students in our particular context and setting. We can move into sort of a experimentation phase where we can make sure that we have the right kinds of variables controlled for, and we have the right analytical framework, that kind of thing, before we move it to expanded trial, where we can actually say some students might get the intervention, others don't, compare the findings and that kind of thing. And then ultimately move it into transition. So how do we actually move this to scale so all of the students would get the benefit of it and not just those in the experiment. So this was supported by all sorts of process documents, diagrams that chart the flow of information, working on relationships, charting out how we would do it, how we would use term by term, and it got very, very complicated very fast, and ultimately it didn't work very well. Pretty quickly, we learned that to do this, the way it was drawn out would take at least 8 months, probably more like 12 to 16 to actually get results that would inform those decisions, which is far too long. Can't guarantee that in 12 months you're going to care about the exact same things. And if you want to make a change, an impactful change, you actually need to do it in a much shorter amount of time. We did adapt this pretty quickly using some other frameworks. We dropped kind of that feasibility phase. We were moving much more quickly into sort of a trial phase, working just on trying to get directional data that can inform design decisions. And that was much more successful. What it did is really force our team to develop the practices and the relationships that are necessary to carry out testing in live courses. So you need to know the faculty, you need to know the deans, you need to know the courses, you need to know the assignments, all of those things. It really forced our team to become experts in that, making sure that we had the checklists, that we had the information that we needed to pull this off. Now, it's not the last thing, though, and we actually did kind of sunset this whole test and learn framework into something that's a little bit more. So let's talk a little bit about the lessons that we learned from going through this. This was really started off as a way to, as a change management approach, right? You want to make a change and you want data and experimentation to back it up. What we found is it more often supported the status quo. That is that thing that we thought that we wanted to know more about at the end of it, often it supported the original conclusions. Or we could say, well, we just don't have enough data to make a change. That's really not where we wanted to be. We also found that the team was getting better at testing. And that doesn't mean that we were making more impactful designs. We were just making design decisions that would actually lead to better tests and might be much more incremental in nature. In doing so, we were actually saying, well, let's put our expertise as designers on the side, and we'll just say, well, let's just make this little tweak because we actually need to make a good test, and that will let us control variables. It actually slowed down innovation and made us shy away from some tests or for some projects that actually wouldn't have made good tests. We also found, and I'm sure this is probably familiar to those who work in this space, very rarely did we get a question like, hey, what are the approaches that we could use using technology to improve certain things? Don't come packaged like that. What they came packaged as were solutions like, I need you to test X and find out Y, and preferably by Z date. This linear framework, even when we had shortened it up, we would still have to come back and say, it's going to take us at least 8 to 10 weeks to develop the test. We're going to need them to go through this data analysis phase, and then we'll get information back to you. That's very difficult when you're working in a large organization where there's a lot of change, a lot of movement of different ideas, flows of information. So we need a way to use to get the answers to questions or to solve parts of the problem and get that back to the asker. We also found that it was more difficult to make strategic decisions with this timeline. Again, even if we're shortening it down to 8 to 12 weeks, that time factor is just something that we could not solve for when you're doing testing and with live students who need weeks or 10 weeks, depending on the kinds of term that they're in, to complete a course, and then additional time for us to analyze the data. So let's talk a little bit about what we're doing now, our current format. And I'm not saying that this is perfect. It is certainly not, but it's what we're doing right now. What we have done is actually kind of separate that larger linear process into different teams that collaborate, but they don't have the same kind of sort of reporting structures or anything like that. They're mostly working somewhat independently on these different pieces of the testing process. And as a result, we can enable those different pieces when and where it makes sense. As a learning engineering, we're principally responsible for this prototyping phase. So if we have a new piece of technology or a new design approach that we want to test out, we can really quickly, in a week or two, come up with a prototype that's going to take the learning science principles, take some technology, and come out with something that is at least going to offer what this could look like, what the benefit might be. We also have the ability to just say, hey, if we need user testing on something, we have something that's already been designed, we can send it out, get some students or some student proxies, and get information back so we can enhance the design or just get some early directional data without putting it in front of a test. When we do want to move into that test, we have our team we call REMAP, which stands for Rapid Experimentation, Measurement, Adoption, and Partnership, which is why we call it REMAP. They're actually charged with doing the controls for the experiment, the analysis, getting the sections, making sure that it's all fits within that framework and can report out on that. Obviously, it's a much longer process, so we can enable it when we need that level of rigor to make a decision. And then finally, we have a separate group that's entirely dedicated to just supporting scaling. We can actually move from prototype to scale when it makes sense. So if it's something like we just want to expand a new process to help support our, getting things that might be as small as how do we work with testing in Brightspace, we can actually move that right over to production, say it's ready to go. We did a little bit of testing, a little bit of proof of concept, help us figure out what we need so that everyone can benefit from this. But we can also move throughout the entire thing. So if something moves with prototyping, it can go on to user research. We can employ our colleagues at REMAP to get more information. And then finally, we can go into test production. We still have that capability, but it does require that level of coordination. So that's definitely something that it's kind of the watch out for with this model. We solve some things, we don't solve everything. And when you have teams that are working independently, timelines might not line up, our strategy might not line up. Those kinds of things need a lot of care and consideration, but it has definitely helped us get better at making strategic decisions that are using data and really focused on improving those learning outcomes, because we don't all have to wait for each other to move from one phase to the next. And to just give you an idea about how this is working, I'm going to pass it back to Sarah so she can walk you through what this might look like.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Colin. So I'm going to talk through a little bit about a specific example and how we applied sort of the elements of the test and learn framework that Colin spoke a little bit to, and sort of the multiple research frameworks that we've evolved to get to now to solve a specific problem related to academic integrity. So our goal was to reduce the number of cases of plagiarism intentionally or unintentionally. I have to note, this is just one approach of a series that we explored and have implemented since, related to increasing student knowledge and faculty knowledge in this area. So I'm going to dive in first a little bit into the design. So whenever we are trying to test something, we still are using all of the same, we still consider and intentionally apply the existing and relevant frameworks and standards to that design. Of course, that's only when we're not trying to intentionally investigate those frameworks. But in the context of this one, we applied some really important ones. First, when it came to the academic integrity statement, we thought about backwards design for learning. Stay focused on the end goal. Use this to inform the decisions each step of the way. When testing, it's easy sometimes to let our intellectual curiosities take us in a lot of directions that can result in making enhancements indirectly related to the design and also connecting a lot of information. And then you end up having too many data points that can't and don't inform you getting any closer to a decision at the end. Second, think about universal design for learning, even when you're trying to test something new. Represent the content in multiple ways. Think about announcements, reminders, text-based, video, and make sure you're always explaining the why. Provide students the relevance of what they're doing. It's so important. We also thought a lot about accessibility and inclusion. When it comes to academic integrity, information, and a lot of the things that are related to policy, institutional policy, it's written in high-level legal language, and it's not accessible for students. In fact, it actually can arouse a lot of feelings of fear and can actually cause students to just completely disengage from the content. We also thought a lot about self-assessment and reflection within the design. We wanted this to provide students with an opportunity to pause, think about their work, and have an opportunity to pivot. And we wanted instructors to be flexible. So I'm going to talk through the design a little bit in the next one, but we really coached instructors to be open to deadline flexibility and to work with students and mentor them through the process. So next, I'm going to talk about Brightspace functionality. So we used a scheduled announcement. You're going to see it in the next slide. We also used the survey tool in a way that it probably wasn't initially intended, but it served the purposes of this. And we also used a release condition. So when the students submitted the survey, it unlocked the content. All right, so next I'm going to share a little video of sort of exactly what the academic integrity statement was. So in the first learning module within the course, students saw the academic integrity statement. There was a link to the academic integrity page. Academic integrity page, an explanation of why it's important when completing assignments. And then at the start of the module, we included an assignment that contains the academic integrity statements so students could see the scheduled announcement. This announcement explained that students needed to complete an academic integrity statement aligned with an assignment in their course. Specifically, it detailed where the statement was located and gave step-by-step instructions for how to complete it. It also linked to the academic honesty policy and the academic integrity pages. Finally, students need to complete the integrity statement itself. When assessing the assignment that requires the accessing the assignment that requires the academic integrity statement, students can only open the rubric and guidelines. Students must complete the integrity statement prior to submitting the assignment. When students are ready to complete the integrity statement, they'll click into it, read, and agree to the statement, then submit and confirm the survey. After completing the statement, the submission area for the assignment opens. If students have questions about academic integrity issues or have issues submitting the statement itself, students were encouraged to reach out to their instructor, and instructors were encouraged to then refer to the course facilitation guides or to our community standards team for additional support. All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit more now that we've shown the academic integrity statement. I apologize for the slight technical difficulties as I was recording the video and narrating it here. But essentially, gating and releasing content in this way wasn't part of our standard practice within our design frameworks and models at the time. There was definitely reasonable hesitation about the integration of a statement that could be punitive to students in the way that it can prevent them from submitting an assignment, especially if the navigation experience and the expectations weren't clear. So to mitigate the risk, we used multiple tools in our toolbox that Colin talked about. We took into consideration the context and the risk as we were thinking about how to approach this. So we conducted user experience testing of our designs to improve the language and to reduce any confusion before we moved forward with an interim test. We also provided a lot of supports. We coached instructors to provide flexibility in supporting students if they needed more time to complete, or if they weren't sure how to complete to submit the statement at all. We also included support materials in multiple formats to both students and faculty throughout the weeks leading to the integration of the statement. Whenever you're testing something, take the time that you need to establish clear and aligned hypotheses and metrics with your stakeholders. Ask yourself what evidence and what degree of confidence you need to move forward with implementing the change. It's nice to gather an array of diverse metrics, but sometimes it can actually create more challenges when trying to make decisions. Lastly, and certainly not least, share the results. Share them even if it wasn't or doesn't feel like it was a success. If you learned something, then it's valuable, and it can prevent duplicative efforts, and it's important for increasing institutional knowledge. Ultimately, and probably most importantly, by sharing the results, you can actually spark new and even better ideas to move forward. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Jaymes.
It's such a pleasure to hear from my colleagues on this topic, and we really want to thank everybody for taking the time out of their days, of their evenings, whenever it is that you're viewing this recording, to be able to join us for this opportunity. So we are more than happy to follow up with any questions you may have. Please outreach us. Make a connection. We'd love to share more about the ways in which we've approached testing at SNHU, our experiences overall, and be in service to you as we may be helpful. And thank you for your time.